you why I say that.
Awesome.
All right, key takeaways following Peyton's plan. What are the takeaways on this? I think really, number one, remember your children are not adults. He calls this the little adult assumption. And that is what leads to too much talking and explanation. It's not completely the because I said so, but it's a little bit that you are the adult, you are the parent, and when we start kind of explaining what our thoughts are behind all of the things we're asking of them, it's kind of like we're on the stand rather than we're the adult, we're the ones who take care of you, we're the ones with wisdom. So just remember they're not adults. And there's an opening here for an explanation the first time around, but not re-explaining every time you ask them the same thing. What I'll tell you in a minute, the strength, stay calm and talk less. If you guys know me and have been listening to me for a little while, you know that I always had to remind myself, be the adult. And then I had to always put my armor on, remain calm, and not talk. So I immediately loved this book. I'm like, okay, those are all the things I struggled with in the first two bullet points.
Well, those are the big stumbling stones, right? Because those are the things that when we assume our kids know better and that they have the ability to do better, then we expect them to act like an adult. But we forget their frontal lobes aren't even fully developed, right? I mean, so we can't hold them to those same standards. And I do think the staying calm and being aware of your emotions, we know that people who do that as adults are, we want to be around those people, and the people who don't do that as
Yes.
adults are the people we don't want to be around. And so why wouldn't we try to improve our own social emotional well-being and awareness and get better as humans, because it doesn't just impact our kids, it impacts our marriages and our relationships and our jobs. And so this is just good advice for life.
I actually think that the training that my children gave me on remaining calm helped me later in my career. I
Yeah.
think it's really right. We use those skills on the job and we need those skills on the job, but somehow our children press all our buttons and then we lose it. So this methodology is really for you if you're one of those people who finds yourself yelling at your children. And we all do it. We all do it, but it's the recommendation. If you follow this, maybe you can back down on the yelling and have a little more calm going on. The trick is the consistency. Third bullet point, you got to do it all the time. Got it. You can't just try it for 1 week and say, oh, it didn't work. And then the second half of the book, he really talks about a lot of positive things. And all of this is so you can enjoy your children more and not spend so much time yelling.
I think that's huge too. In a conversation recently, I was with somebody, and my friend Greg said, "Hey, we're talking a lot about things that are hard or things that are difficult. Can we flip the script and think a little bit about the things that are wonderful and the things that are great?" And I think any parenting book that doesn't help you enjoy your children is not worth its salt. So this makes me want to go and read this for sure, because that's the whole point of all this, is that we would have great relationship with our kids, particularly as they get older.
Exactly. All right. So Tom Phelan says you have three jobs as a parent. Controlling the obnoxious behavior, and that's where this 1, 2, 3 comes in. It's whining, teasing, arguing, pouting, yelling, tantrums, all the things that they try on a daily basis, right? And that's where the counting comes in. And I have a slide for that where I can, and I'm going to read to you from his text. And then encouraging positive behavior. The obnoxious behavior he calls stop behavior. The positive is start behavior. And it's important to know and remember that the counting method is only for stop. If you want your child to get their bath in the evening, that's a start behavior. That's not something you start counting, right? So remember that as we go through our talk today. And then he does talk a lot about the sympathetic listening and not over parenting. And I think that his emphasis on not talking, not explaining, helps you in not over parenting.
Becky, what does overparenting mean? I mean, you'd think like, okay, I'm parenting. Like you're either parenting or you're not parenting. What does overparenting mean, do you think?
Well, I think Emily Oster in her podcast kind of calls out the type of parenting where you sit your child down and you explain everything and you want to hear what they have to say and you let's solve this together and you watch every move they make, you correct every move they make. I do think there's some experts that um, talked about how many corrections per day you're supposed to have. I don't know anything about that, but I do know you have to watch that. You know, the opposite of how probably we were raised, where you go out and play, right? Parents who have to watch every move, so they have to be with them all the time. Emily, I think, talked about a little bit, some of that might come from guilt, feelings of guilt that you're not with them enough. So when you are with them, you're on top of them all the time and feel like you have to be involved. What do you think? Peyton, I know you know the answer.
Well, no, I just think it's helpful because, I'm an overachiever, Becky, and I know that our audience, we're filled with people who are just like the best of the best and the cream of the crop. And, we tend to go overboard sometimes on things. And so I think it's helpful to hear that, like, you know, that that's not actually a good thing too, right? That there is like kind of a nice medium in the way that we parent our children where we're not trying to do everything for them.
Right. I mean, we like Jonathan Haidt and the Let Grow movement. Let them grow up. Let them go out in the sand lot.
Yeah. Love that. And that has a lot to do with your relationship. I think that's huge, right? Where it's like if you're taking the long-term view with your kids, overcorrecting and micromanaging and smoothing the path and all of that stuff is actually not going to lead to a strong relationship with your kids when they're in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Whereas, they might be really good at complying, but it's not a relationship. That's like a robot.
And letting them fail, right? Letting them fail on their own, especially in elementary school. What a great time to make mistakes. Nobody remembers anything about what you did when you were in elementary school.
Yeah.
You could have been terrible in elementary school. Nobody remembers. So let your children make a mistake, not a habitual mistake, but a mistake here and there is actually really good. The kids who grow up through the school of hard knocks tend to be grittier. They have that resilience that they apply to the workplace. They can become an entrepreneurs. It's an overgeneralization, but I do think those little failures help.
Also, really like this, Becky, that effectively as a parent, we have three jobs: stop our kids from doing annoying things, help our kids do more good things, and then to have a nice relationship with them. That feels like I can do that. I'm not going to be perfect at being like doing all the right parenting things, but if I keep my eye on these three things, like I can feel like at the end of the day that I had a win.
And he emphasizes the routines. We've talked about that a lot with Habits of the Household, Justin Early's book, but routines. And so that reminds me of the teachers who do interactive modeling during the first 6 weeks of school. Every routine at school has to be set up. This is what I expect, practiced. In those first 6 weeks, it's incredible. If you do that as a teacher, all of the kids comply for the rest of the year. This is what it looks like to line up. So you do that same thing as a parent. This is what I expect in the evening routine. And you talk about that during a happy time when it's not evening.
Mm,
Right? You set it up, and then that's a routine you practice over and over, and it becomes like clockwork.
awesome.
That's what's next.
All right.
Okay. As I said, this is the strength. This is the strength of the entire program is that you don't talk. It's very interesting because I'll read to you about the counting, but there's no talking before. When you catch the child doing something wrong, you hold up your finger and you say, that's one. You don't say, that's one because this is what I just saw you do, and I've told you time and time again not to do it. You're right. You're making me sick and tired because you are always doing that. Right? You don't say any of that. I was really good at saying that stuff. I could go on on and on. Um, so no talking before. And then when it's over, after they've had their little take five or their consequence, when it's over, no explanations then either, unless it was a new behavior or it was a dangerous behavior, right? It's just like our routine we set up, you know what the expectations were. So you don't have to prove why you're disciplining them.
I think that's
Yeah, and
really
he does say if you are angry, it's not a good time to talk anyway. If the child's angry, not a good time. So basically, there's always too much emotion during that time to add words. And then
you
I
know,
love this. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that matches up with what we know about more recent brain research. Like if this is 30 years old, I don't know if they knew this back then, but literally like you can't take in new information or create a good neural pathway that like will be helpful if you have your big emotion, right? You've got kind of your frontal lobe where you're thinking and your memory and your all this is going and it's literally not even getting in. Sometimes I have to remind myself of that. I'm like, when I'm trying to teach my child that they shouldn't do what they just did when they're hyped up, literally they might not even be hearing anything I'm saying.
Absolutely. And this is the sixth edition of this book. He sold 22 million copies, and it's in so many languages because it works. And if you have a middle schooler and you've never done this before, he actually has a teen version. I did not read that one, but if you read it, please tell me. I'd like to know if it's effective. But yeah, all of the brain research shows that nobody's ready for explanations during a time of big emotions. And then I love this quote, your emotional outburst has the unintended consequence of making your child feel powerful. We talked about that with our positive discipline.
Yeah. Well, and especially when they might feel like they have no control in any other way, right? That's a great way for them to exert that authority of theirs. Is well, if I can make mom blow up, at least I can make her do something.
Yes, I have to say that he gives many examples of parents fighting back with their children, and he just calls that what it is. He says that's a parent tantrum. And so this book, this method is really as much about the parent as it is the child. And I think that's why Emily Oster in Raising Parents was drawn to it, and she used it for her own child, right? It's really about you. And when you get this method, down, then you can help your children. That's how you help them. What's next?
All right.
Okay. Remember, the counting is only for stop behaviors. I'm going to read to you how it exactly works. You have to expect that it takes 2 weeks. And I would say, with some of my kids, it might have taken a little longer than that. You have two chances. The child has two chances to correct their behavior, and then they take five. Originally, he would call it a timeout. He doesn't even call it a timeout anymore because some timeouts have been misused. And so it's really, it can be a take five or it can be a consequence. It's different. Like if you're at the grocery store and the child can't kind of step aside to reboot, then you have to use a consequence like 15 minutes earlier bedtime, a loss of a privilege, all of those good consequences that you guys use. All right. So the example is the child having a full out tantrum. You look at your child, you hold up one finger, you look down at the child and calmly say, that's one. If you are in a crowded place or a public place, and you've been doing this for a month, all you have to do is, right? They're going to know your expression. I love this. He says he doesn't care. He's insane with rage and keeps the tantrum going full blast. You let 5 seconds go by and you hold up two fingers and you say, that's two. You get the same lousy reaction. So after 5 more seconds, you hold up three fingers and you say, take five. Now that's when you have talked to your child ahead. What does that look like? We have take five in the lower school at Westminster, and we practice that ahead on the first day, and everybody knows what it is. And so, is that a chair in a different room? Is it the staircase? Is it the bedroom? You kind of have to decide, and maybe it kind of differs depending on the context. He says, now what does this mean? It means that your son was just given two chances to shape up, but in this instance, he didn't. He did not stop the undesirable behavior. So there is going to be a consequence. A break time is a brief period when you and your child take a break from each other. And he says that a child can sit on a chair, on a stair. You do not talk or make eye contact during break time. But the silence is not angry silence. It's not punitive. And he basically says 1 minute per age of the child. And sometimes you add extra minutes because it was particularly egregious behavior. And then some behaviors are an automatic 3. Your child just comes in the room and yells an expletive, right? Some, and you'll know, I used to tell the teachers it makes your jaw drop, right? You are blown away by what they just did. That's an automatic 3. Let me see if there's anything. Stop me now if there's questions. Peyton, what do you think?
I was just thinking, Becky. So I have an 11-year-old, a 8-year-old, almost 9-year-old, and a 6-year-old, almost 7. And my boys bookend my girl. And my oldest will sometimes be a little bit of like somebody who kind of puts his feet on the back of somebody's chair and is bugging them. And we're in the car and I'm driving and I'm distracted and I'm annoyed. And I'm like, please take your feet off their chair. And he'll put it on like a different part of the chair. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can really see this being, I'm going to use it today. I'm going to say, hey, we're going to really work on this. Here's the behavior that I would like. And here's the behavior that I expect. If you don't, here's how this is going to work. Let's see how it goes. Because I think, especially if I go back to that first slide, it's like the annoying behaviors, right? It's the whining, it's the teasing, it's the poking your sister when you're bored. It's the, talking back a little bit type stuff, right? This feels perfect for that.
I know. So one example is he's looking at me again.
Yeah.
Raise your hand if your child has not said that with a sibling. He's looking, they're in the back of the car and you're driving somewhere. He's looking at me.
He's breathing.
Yes. And the author says they both get it. In other words, you count both children.
Mm-hmm.
If they're in the back seat having sibling rivalry, and he looked at me, no, I didn't. He looked at me, You count them both, they both get a consequence. And have some very short little consequences. I was the queen of these large sweeping consequences, which were not good, and it was almost impossible to
I
hold them
went to
to
the
it.
birthday party this
Oh
weekend.
yeah, no 10th birthday party. No computer for a month. It's
Yeah.
really hard that you can't do those. You have to have small increments because it's getting the punishment that is that matters. So even if it's like you have to go to bed 15 minutes early or
Mhm.
no dessert, little simple things. And then be consistent and make sure you follow through.
So you're saying, according to this book, the take five really is kind of like go to your cool off spot and like chill out, cool off. But
Mhm.
then do you do a consequence after the take five, or is the take five the consequence unless you can't do a take five and then you might have a different?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, take five is the consequence. Now, if you have a child who won't do it,
Mm.
right? I had one of those. Um,
Yeah. What if
then
they
you,
don't go? Like whatever.
right, they don't go. Now, he talks about if you have a child, you may have to escort them.
Mm.
They're eventually going to be worn down if you do this for 2 straight weeks, right? They're eventually going to realize that you're going to stick with it, and this is a method you're going to keep using.
Mm.
But you can pick you the most effective thing. And I am sure the book 123 Magic for Teenagers has different things. As you might remember, I always used turning off the cell phone. Right. So I imagine the teenage book has some kind of teenage consequences. You know your child well, and you have to sit and think what will matter to them. There are some children who are willing to risk all, right? They're going to fall on the sword and they don't care what you do. You have to be really clever and think, is it, a play date that they want? Is it a sport event that they want to go to? What do you use, Peyton?
It's funny. Ever since I started doing positive discipline more, I've actually found as my kids age, I do consequences less, but I really do find that a positive like timeout or like a take five, if you will, that's not a punitive or guilty, like you have to go to take five, but more just like, hey, we need a reset. Let's start over. That's pretty huge. Although the other day I got so exasperated, I was like, you took away 2 minutes of my sanity. So you have to come and give me a hug for 2 minutes to restore my sanity.
I love it.
that
Well,
was my consequence.
that's so great. Well, if you move to the next slide, I just want to take a minute to tell you that I called a friend I know, a graduate of Westminster, probably in the late 90s, a mom of three, who's a successful doctor in San Francisco who started using this method, and I interviewed her yesterday. So her children now are 13, 9, and 5. So she kind of has a good spectrum for us to think about. And she started using 123Magic when her first two were 5 and 3. And the reason is they got an au pair girl, and their au pair was struggling with discipline. One of the strengths of this method is what she figured out was they all read the book. She and her husband each read the book, and the au pair read the book so that they would be all using the same methodology. And I think that's great if you have a nanny or other significant caretakers, grandparents, who would all be clued in about this. So I asked her to summarize in one sentence what um, what she would call this. Um, and she said it was more like a rubric than a must do. It meets you wherever you are. And I love that. This is really something that you customize to your family. Um, So she said it really helped control parent tantrums, that they realized that they were just begging their kids, telling do this, and then they kept pleading, they finally snapped and they yelled and they punished. And this took all of that away. Um, so she said the strength is in taking the emotion away and not having to win because it doesn't turn into an argument. Um, so I asked her if she phased out 123 Magic with her 13-year-old. And she said, well, it has turned into him taking a walk around the block.
Mm.
And so he has a lot of responsibility. And in their family, their kids do a lot of chores. She thinks that just involving them in what's going on in the household has really been good. And she uses it to distract them when she sees them getting on edge because they like to contribute. And so her 13-year-old has living in San Francisco has some good independence and goes out and walks around the block, and they still use that.
Yeah.
um, One thing they have done, and my daughter, who spends a lot of time in their household, said this is amazing. Both she and her husband cook, and they have a very wide repertoire of food that they introduce to their children. If the children, from the beginning, if the children complain about the food and don't want to eat it, they can get a bowl of plain yogurt. No joke. And my daughter has seen it in action so many times that there's not even discussion. The child says, I'm having yogurt tonight. And they go in the refrigerator and they get their bowl of yogurt. Consequently, their three children eat sushi and crab cakes. And I mean, they have a very wide palate, and there's never a fight about it.
Yeah.
They can have plain yogurt for dinner every night, but that's not how it has turned out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I love that. At our house, it's just fine. You don't have to eat. But maybe they're a little nicer. At least you get some plain yogurt. I love it.
She said, here, I'm just going to tell you the few other things um, that the children self-regulate and then they come back when they're ready, which is very much akin to the Take Five that we introduced at school that has worked out really, really well. She said they're basically learning emotional management for the rest of their lives. This is so close, really, to positive discipline, Peyton. It's almost like just one extra little thing
Yeah.
to curb the parent yelling,
Yeah.
right?
I'm putting
It's
this in my toolbox today.
it's remarkable. And I just want to say, tell me if you're interested in 2 weeks. I am happy to come back and do the second half of this book. Listen to these chapters and then just tell me if you want to hear these. Encouraging good behavior is part 4 of the book, which I did not address. And the good behaviors are this: getting up and out in the morning, cleaning up and chores, surviving supper time, tackling the homework problem, going to bed. So if you want me, thanks for that, Judith. Um, Anybody tell me if you, I'll do all of those because I think basically it will be applying this same methodology to what he calls the start behaviors.
Yeah, I love that. Throw in the chat if there's a particular one that y'all really want to hear. It looks like going to bed right now. It's a popular one. That might be helpful. A couple, please do all. So next week, y'all, a friend of mine who's a therapist, some of y'all might know, Katie Godey, is going to come on and we're going to have a conversation about how to be on the same page as your partner or your spouse with parenting, which, as Becky mentioned several times, is really helpful. And so we'll have that conversation next week, and then maybe we'll come back, Becky, and do some of
Yeah.
these in the following week. So we'll
We
let y'all.
will, because this book really emphasizes both parents using, and he says it's very effective. Even if a single parent is the only one who uses that, it can still be effective, but if the more the merrier.
Awesome. Well, like we always said, here's our info if you want to reach out to us for anything. And then Becky's a doctor, but not that kind of doctor. So obviously, we just like to share the information with y'all that we have been blessed to have encountered ourselves. So thank y'all so
Just
much.
educators. We love you guys, and invite your friends, and give your kids a hug from me.